Well, this will be a lecture on the book of Job, part 1, Introduction in Job chapters 1 through 11, by me, and my name is Dr. Joe Sprinkle. The book is going to deal with the question of suffering and why do good people suffer. First of all, an introduction to the book. The author of Job is unknown. The setting is the territory of Edom. Job is from the land of Uz, according to chapter 1 and verse 1, and Uz, according to Lamentations 4:21, was in Edom. Moreover, Job's friend Eliphaz is a Temanite. He's from Teman, and you can see on the map where Teman is in the territory of Edom. It's mentioned as such in Jeremiah 49 and verse 7, which also mentions it was a village or region known for its wisdom. Edom is in modern-day Jordan, south and east of the Dead Sea. Now, one of the questions that comes up with this book is the book history or is the book fiction? In favor of it being history, Job is mentioned as a real person by the prophet Ezekiel in Ezekiel 14 and verse 14 and also verse 20, where he's listed along with Noah and Daniel as great men of the past. But in favor of it being fictional is the fact that all the dialogues between Job and his friends are in high poetry. And who exactly talks to each other in high poetry? So is it history or is it fiction? And my conclusion is what we have here is a poetic retelling of a historical event. In other words, Job was a real person, and hence Ezekiel can refer to him as a real person, just like Noah. On the other hand, someone has come along and retold the story and reset what the characters say in poetic form. Kind of like the story of Paul Revere. Paul Revere in colonial times was a real person that came along and warned that the British were coming. But then Longfellow wrote a poem about him, Listen, My Children, and You Shall Hear the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, and reframed it in a poetic way. And what we have here is a reframing of a historical person in a poetic way. So the date of the book of Job has to be divided into two. The date of the historical events that underlie Job would be around patriarchal times, roughly 2100 to 1500 BC, the patriarchal period. On the other hand, the poetic retelling of the story of Job is probably much later. There's a good case to be made that it was reframed in poetry around the time of the monarchy. That would explain why the enemy could be called the Chaldeans in chapter 1 and verse 17. Chaldeans didn't become enemies in that part of the world until much later than the time of the patriarchs. Here's an outline of the book. You have a prologue, chapters 1 and 2. The prologue says that Job suffers as a test of his faith. But then you have the dialogue between Job and his friends, chapters 3 through 31, and his friends are going to argue that Job suffers as a result of his sin. Elihu, another friend, shows up in Job 32 through 37, and he's going to teach that suffering teaches us and molds a person's character. And then God is going to have a dialogue in Job 38 through 41, and he's going to focus on the need for faith in the midst of suffering. So let's deal with the first part, the answer of the prologue, that Job suffers as a test of faith. Chapter 1 and verse 2 speaks about Job. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was really wealthy, you see. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East, which you might ask, east of what? East of Israel. Now, in 117, it refers to him as a blameless and upright man. That's illustrated by the fact that he prays and he offers sacrifice for his children just in case any one of them have sinned, chapter 1 and verse 5. And God himself several times testifies that Job is as good a person as they come. Chapter 1 and verse 8, for example, then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. So Job's suffering is clearly not going to be because he's an especially bad person. God himself says he's a blameless and upright man. Well, what Satan does is tell God that, well, Job is so good, but he's only so good because you blessed him so much. But take away his family, take away his wealth, take away his health, and then he won't prove to be so good. And so God gave Satan permission to do those very things. So his family was taken away when a storm wind hit and blew down the house that they were all in. And his wealth was taken away by marauders, all in chapter 1. In chapter 2, his health is taken away and he's all covered with boils from head to toe. So that he's having to scrape out the pus from his boils with a piece of pottery. And his wife wasn't of much help. His wife said to him, are you still holding to your integrity? Curse God and die, chapter 2 and verse 9. But Job seems to pass these tests. He responds after his family and wealth were taken away, chapter 1 and verse 21. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And then in chapter 2 and verse 10, in response to his wife, he says, you're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And then it comments, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said. He seems to have passed the test. Now let's think a little bit about suffering as a test of faith. There's a lot of people that are tested in the Bible. Job, Abraham in Genesis 22, where he is told to take your son, your only son, Isaac, and offer him up as a burnt offering. His faith was tested. Israel was tested in the wilderness. And then Jesus is tested in the temptation narratives in the gospel. And you have to ask the question, does God still test people today? And I don't know why he might not. Well, having seemingly passed the test, some friends come along to comfort him, 3 friends, and they stay with him for about a week where he says hardly a word. But then he breaks his silence and he curses the day of his birth. Why is light given to those in misery and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than hidden treasure, who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave? Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? Notice he's blaming God at this point. For sighing comes to me instead of food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. And with this outburst, we have to ask ourselves, has Job lost his faith? Will Satan prove to have been right after all? Well, this is where Job's friends come in. And Job's 3 friends each come with the same message. Job, the reason that you suffer must be because you have sinned. So, ironically, having come to comfort Job, they end up accusing him instead. Now, this begins the first cycle of dialogue between Job and his friends. And one friend will speak, Job will respond, another friend will speak, then Job will respond, yet a third friend will speak, and Job will respond. And you'll get 3 different cycles of these things. And this is the first cycle, chapters 4 through 11. The first friend is Eliphaz, who says, basically, Job, you have sinned. He starts off kind of politely. If someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? But who can keep from speaking? Think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled. You have strengthened faltering knees. But now trouble comes to you, and you are discouraged. It strikes you, and you are dismayed. Should not your piety be your confidence, and your blameless ways your hope? Consider now, who being innocent has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those that plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. Now in verses 7 and 8, he gets to his solution to why Job is suffering. Innocent people don't perish. Upright people don't get destroyed. The fact that you're coming close to perishing and that you're coming close to being destroyed must prove that you're not innocent and that you're not upright. You must have sown trouble because you're reaping pain. Bildad comes along with a similar answer. Job has denied what Eliphaz had to say. So Bildad comes along and says, Job, not only have you sinned, but your kids must have sinned too. Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, and I have to tell you a joke here. Bildad the Shuhite is reputedly the shortest man in the Bible because he was only Shuhite. That makes him even shorter than Nehemiah. Let me continue. Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, How long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? In other words, God wouldn't allow you to suffer needlessly. He doesn't pervert justice, and therefore you must deserve the punishment you're getting. Then he goes on to say this, verse 4. When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. In other words, when that tornado hit the house and killed all 10 of his children, it was because they deserved it. It was the penalty for some sort of sin which they had committed. And then Zophar, the third friend in chapter 11, comes along and agrees with the other two and adds that God forgets some of your sins. In other words, God could punish you even more if you got what you really deserved. Verse 1, Then Zophar the Naamathite replied, Are all these words to go unanswered? Is this talker to be vindicated? Where your idle words reduce men to silence? Will no one rebuke you when you mock? You say to God, My beliefs are flawless. I am pure in your sight. Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom has 2 sides. Know this, that God has even forgotten some of your sin. So not only have you sinned, but God doesn't even remember all of it, and therefore he hasn't punished you as much as your sin deserves. Job responds to his friends by saying that God has been unfair, and he wishes that there was some sort of mediator between himself and God that could resolve this issue, and how he could explain through the mediator how God is wrong for having punished him. You see, Job actually agrees with his friends' simplistic theology. The friends say that, well, if you sin, you suffer, and if you suffer, you must have sinned. The problem that Job has, though, is that he knows that he hasn't done anything worthy of the terrible suffering that he's currently enduring. So he says in chapter 7 and verse 20, "If I have sinned, what have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you made me your target?" He doesn't even know what he could have done. Job chapter 9 and verse 17, "For he bruises me without cause." God is punishing him for no reason whatsoever, it seems. And chapter 9 and verse 33, "If only there were someone to arbitrate between us, to lay his hand on us both. If there were an arbitrator, he could tell God why it is that God has been unjust in punishing him." And then chapter 10, 15, and 16, "Even if I'm innocent, I can't lift my head. If I hold my head high, you stalk me like a lion." I know I can't dare to accuse God of wrongdoing because he'll punish me for it. And yet it seems that God is in the wrong in punishing me for non-existent sins. Well, what are we to make of the answer of Job's friends? Well, their answer is true enough in some cases. Some people do bring disaster upon themselves by their own sins. And so if you commit theft or if you commit murder, you might be caught and end up being punished. If you drive like a maniac, you might end up wrapping your car around a tree. You will suffer as a result of your own foolish, sinful actions. If you drink too much, you might get cirrhosis of the liver. If you smoke, you might get lung cancer. Bad things that people do can bring disaster upon themselves. But their answer is wrong in the case of Job. Again, it was God himself who said that Job is a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. Suffering is not necessarily because you've done something. Not everybody who suffers has deserved it. Well, in our next lecture, we'll go on to talk about the second and third cycles of Job chapters 12 through 31.